The essence of what we're focused in on today is this line right here, okay? This is, as you know, the main is the entry point into your program, right? And let's look at the inputs and outputs that were defined here. All right, we have the output, right? The return type as int, right, as an integer. And typically we will return 0 when the main function has been successful, okay? Everything went smoothly. We want to indicate success. If something was calling your program, this will be the indication that your program ran successfully. Okay. Typically, anything that is not 0 indicates that there's some sort of failure. Okay, with different codes indicating different types of failure. And then we'll look at these two different types of input parameters. Right. We have here argc is actually the number of inputs into your program that you're passing in from the command line. And here's the actual values. All right, so let me show you what I mean by command line arguments. First, let me come down here and let's actually look at enter our project. And let me just compile this kind of program that doesn't really do anything. Okay, we'll call it example. All right, so if I'm running the example program, and let's just say I wanted to pass in some numbers by default. Okay, these are usually things that are configuring the program to run a certain way that does not require recompiling the program, okay, to make some changes. So maybe I'm, so I'm passing in 12 and 34, okay. Now, right now, as we know, that does nothing, right, because we have no logic in our program for using any of these values, okay. So let me just focus first on what argc is indicating. Okay, argc is the number of input arguments that are being sent in. And so let me just display that to the screen. Okay. So %d for an integer, and let's just display the argc value to the screen. All right, that's going to be the only thing our program does. Let me recompile it. And I'm just going to run it with just example, right? That's it. I'm just going to run the executable. And notice that argc is actually equal to 1, right? Well, let's see what happens if I pass something in. Actually equal to 2, right? The reason it's going to be 1 even where it doesn't look like there's passing in anything is the first argument is going to be the name of the executable that we were calling. All right, so let me go ahead and actually print out argv sub 0, right? This here is indicating that it's an array of strings, right? We'll look more deeply later in the semester. This type here, this symbol here, the asterisk, actually indicates that it is pointing to an address in memory. You're not really supposed to know the details of that yet. We'll get into that. It could be a fairly complicated topic, and we need to spend the proper amount of time focused in on just that. Okay, but right now we're just going to use it. And we can treat it like a string, right? And I can say that it's actually an array of strings, right? And I want the very first one, or arg0, okay, or arg0. And if I recompile that, let me recompile it. And let me run that. And you'll notice that here we have one input, and that input is our just default, the name of the executable. Okay, it's going to be there by default. All right, so you really always have one input argument no matter what. All right, one command line argument that's coming into main. All right, what you could do if you want to pass in more. Right, we can look at argv1. And even argv2. And now let's look at an example. Let me just see if I can clear out some room here. in which we're let's pass in a couple different things, right? Maybe A, B, C, and then maybe a number. Okay. Notice now we have 3 input arguments. First one's the executable, and then we have A, B, C, and 1, 2, 3. All right. Important thing to note: right now, these are all being treated as strings. All being treated as strings. If we wanted to convert one to another, right, we would have to another data type. We could go ahead and we could do that. So, for instance, we could if we knew that the user was always going to be entering in a number from as a command line argument, we'd want to convert that particular, that particular argument of argv and convert it to, say, a type int or double or whatever it happened to be, all right, so that we can perform operations using it. Before I do that, let me look at another thing that's quite common. So typically, when you're designing a program, you might know that it needs to have a certain number of input arguments. Okay. So say that you're always expecting to have 2, right? So you have your default 1, right? So you always have 1 plus 2 more, right? So a common thing that you might want to do, right, is it would make a lot of sense to have some error checking. Right, so if I always wanted to have the user provide 2 command line arguments, I'd want to check if they entered the correct number. Right, so in this case, because they're always going to be 1, I really want to see if they're going to be, it should be 3, right? Because it's going to be the default 1 plus 2 that the user needs to pass in. Okay, and you can say print an error message. Wrong number of input args. And then returning -1 indicate failure. Okay, that would be a common thing to do. Right, so seeing an example here, let me go ahead and compile this again. Right, in this case, say I only provided 1 input argument, it should complain. Right, so that's expecting 2. Right, if I pass in 2, it ran successfully. Right, so let's see why you might want to, let's just look at a very basic example of using command line arguments. Maybe I wanted to, instead of using this example here, what if I wanted to, say, use the command line arguments, an extraordinarily simple, kind of trivial case in which I wanted to use it as a way of summing 2 numbers that are passed as input arguments, all right? So two integers that you'd expect to be passed in, and then sum them together. Well, what you would need to do in that case, right, would be you'd have to actually convert arg1 and arg2 to an integer, right? We saw how to do that in the last video, right? The typical way to do that would be using a function. The a2i to convert from a string to an integer. And let's do that for the other one as well. Okay, and then we can print, or we can calculate our sum. And then go ahead and print it out. Alright, so now let's go ahead and do this, and I'm going to give it a more descriptive name. When I compile, I'm going to actually call that executable sum now instead of example. And let's see, A2I, oh, we ran into a compiler issue, and it was because I am missing the standard library. Okay, that if you run into that warning, implicit declaration error, then it's missing the proper library, right? Doesn't know how to find that. And then also, this is not arg. I see the error here. It's complaining about the data type. It's because I accidentally typed argc and not argv. So let's fix that. Right? You want to get used to looking at the error messages. They usually provide a pretty, they can be a little bit cryptic, but you get more and more used to being able to pick out what they're referring to. And a lot of times here it's pretty good because it's giving you the exact line number. Okay. So then it would be sum, and let's just say if I did 12 plus 13. Okay. And we notice that calculated the sum correctly. All right, so that would be an example of using command line arguments, doing a little bit of error checking here, checking that the right number were passed in, and also doing a little bit of data conversion, converting the string, which is the type that's being sent in by default, and converting it to integers to be able to perform the operation. Okay. All right, so that's going to conclude this video. If it went fast, feel free to pause, go back, watch it a second time. That's the beauty of videos, is you can kind of go through them as many times as you need to be able to get the material and make sure that you understand it well. Okay? And if you get stuck, ask questions. We'll help you out. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.